Hello and welcome back to the Ubuntu Server series. Today we're going to talk about initial setup considerations. Now that sounds like a generic, weird sounding title, but what I basically mean here is once you have it installed, like we learned in previous nuggets, what do you do? What's the first thing you do to get your server ready to go? Well, let's talk about some things that we need to understand about Ubuntu so that we know what to do. Okay, the first thing I want to talk about is repositories. Now I know there is a lot of text on the screen, so here I'll draw a dog with floppy ears and a little nose, a happy dog. If at any time during this slide you start to fall asleep, just look at our happy little puppy dog there and he'll wake you up. Actually, that's a terrifying puppy dog. Maybe you shouldn't look at that puppy dog at all. Anyway, repositories. These are the places that software is stored and you would download it from. So like the App Store or the Ubuntu Software Center, this is what it queries when it looks for what software is available, and where it also retrieves those files. However, there's a bunch of different types of repositories that are available for Ubuntu, and I'm just going to briefly describe what they are. Now, the security and updates, these are both updates, but one of them is more important. Now, which one do you think is more important? Well, security. In fact, a lot of times security is something that people will have automatically update, so that if there's a security breach or a security hole found in the software, that's updated right away and your system is secure. You may not want to install all the updates right away. Maybe an update is going to break something on your system, so you don't want to update. As long as it's not a security risk, you don't have to. But both of these are updates to existing software. All right, the main repository. This is where all the officially supported Ubuntu software lives. So if you're installing something that the Ubuntu company or the Canonical company supports, that's where it's going to be stored. The same thing is kind of true with restricted, but a little bit different. So these are things that are not completely free, like open source free, like free as in beer, free as in speech kind of thing. These are not completely free. However, they're so commonly used that Canonical still supports them. So the restricted repository is supported by Canonical. It's just not completely free software. All right, that doesn't mean you necessarily have to pay for it. It just means that it's not free in the sense of open source. Now, the Universe repository is community supported. This has tons and tons, thousands and thousands of packages, but they're not officially supported by the Ubuntu team. This doesn't mean it's going to break your install. It just means that the Ubuntu or Canonical isn't searching for things like security errors. Okay, so if there's something in the Universe repository, that all of a sudden a security flaw has been found, it's not going to be updated with the same panache and the same urgency that something in the main repository would be updated into the security repository. It will probably get addressed, but again, it's by the community. So the community is going to be addressing those updates. That's just something important to know about Universe. Maybe you don't want to have that repository activated on a production server that you need to have support for, immediately. Multiverse is similar to Universe. However, these are software package that are restricted by copyright or legality. Things like codecs, video codecs, we don't run into this as much in the server world as you do on the desktop world, but things like decoding, MPEG-2 files or playing DVDs, because there is a breaking of encryption to play DVDs on Linux. So those are the sort of things that would be in the multiverse repository. These are the, oh no, actually I can't just draw a box around them. So I'll just keep going. The partner repository, that's an N. The partner repository, this is something with third-party apps like Adobe's Flash Player is going to be stored in there. Again, for server, we don't use it quite as much, but it's important to know what it is because it's available for Ubuntu Server. You can enable it and install things from there. The extras, this is a new one. This is kind of the new kid on the block, the extras repository, and I actually had to Google to make sure I got the terminology for these exactly right. The extras repository is for new apps that were ported to previous versions of Ubuntu. So let's say that there's a new application in Ubuntu 13.04, but you're running Ubuntu 12.04. Now, not an update to an existing package, but a new application. So let's say all of a sudden in 13.04 they are now including Coffee Cup Wars. the game. I don't know what Coffee Cup Wars the game is, but all of a sudden it's included in 1304, but you're on 1204 and you really want it. Well, the extras repo is where something like that would be put, as opposed to backports. Now this is the example here with backports is kind of like extras, but it's not for new apps. It's for new versions of existing apps. So let's say that in 1204 we have Coffee Wars version 2, and you want to play Coffee Wars or Coffee Cup Wars, whatever I said, version 3, but it's not going to be released for your 12.04 distribution. Well, if you enabled backports and somebody included the backport to it, you might be able to play Coffee Cup Wars 3.0 on your system if you have the backports repository enabled. Okay? Coffee Cup Wars. I don't know what Coffee Cup Wars are, but I like it. Anyway, proposed. This is basically just things that are proposed, obviously, into things that are proposed to be included into the main repositories. This is kind of like testing or the beta channel. If you enable this, you're going to get software that is not ready to be officially released, but it's proposed. It's like saying, okay, I think this is ready to go. Those people who have the proposed repository enabled can check it out. And then most repositories have a source repository that goes along with it. So you can get like universe and universe source, multiverse and multiverse source, a restricted and restricted source. And what that means is instead of downloading the precompiled binary, you can install from source. So you still use apt-get to get the source code, but then you compile it specifically for your system. If you want an extremely well-tuned system, or if you need like a custom installation or a custom compilation flag that was not included with the Ubuntu standard binaries, this is where you can compile it for your very own system. Like, I'm trying to think of an example. MPlayer is a media player, video player. I think by default they don't have the ASCII rendering engine compiled in, so you may need to recompile that so you can watch Star Wars in ASCII text video. All right, that's the sort of thing that you might have to use the source repository for. And this isn't just one repo, right? Every one of these repos has a -source repo that goes along with it. So there's a bunch of source repositories, one that goes along with each of these repos. Okay, does that make sense? I hope it does. A lot of these are enabled by default. For example, this one is enabled, this one is enabled, this one is enabled. I believe none of these are enabled by default. I know partner is not. Extras I don't think is. Backports is definitely not. Proposed is definitely not. These actually may be now. I think in current versions these are these are enabled by default, but we're going to go look at that right now so you can decide. You shouldn't just assume what's there. You should look anyway. So let's look and see which ones are enabled by default and which ones we're going to have to add or not add. Perhaps we don't want to at all. So let's go to the command line and look at our file and see what is enabled and what's not enabled. Okay, here we are on our workstation system. Again, this is not our server. We're going to click on the fancy little green icon up here that I created to go into the server terminal. So I'm not going to mention this all the time. I'm just going to reiterate this once until we get used to it. Remember, when we're in this terminal window, we're connected to the server. Okay, we're not connected to this desktop. This is the regular desktop that we're on. This is a shortcut to SSH directly into our Ubuntu server. So we're in the Ubuntu server right now. That's what we're looking at. I hope that's clear. I just want to make sure that we understand that we're not on the system with the GUI interface. We're SSH'd into the remote server. All right, enough about that. So we're going to look at repositories. Now, in order to look there, we have to go into the etc apt folder. Okay, so inside here in etc or etc folder, apt for the apt package management system, there's going to be a bunch of files. The way that this works is the sources.list file contains all of the repositories that are currently enabled in the system. There's also a folder, sources.list.d, and I don't think there's anything in there right now. No, there's not. But if we put a file in there, it would add it. It would append it to the sources.list that we currently have. So if you have a bunch that you want to add, you can add them into this folder, and it will just concatenate them all together, and that's what will be will be queried when we're looking for what sources we're going to install from. But we're going to quickly look at the sources.list file. And, oh, look, I was wrong. First time in 20 years. Maybe you don't even know what I'm talking about. But, so here we have, you know what? There's too much stuff here. Let's do this. Let's do less sources.list. And basically the less command just allows us to scroll back and forth. It's like a... Okay, so we'll start right up here. This is our sources.list file, and if there is this hash symbol or this pound symbol, this means that it's commented out. All right, so see how we have CD-ROM references here? You can actually have one of your sources be a CD-ROM. This is particularly useful if you're in a remote location without internet access or without network access. You can actually install packages directly from a CD-ROM. Now we have the network enabled here, and so these are commented out. This is not an efficient way to get software packages, so it's commented those out. All right. Here is where we start seeing what are enabled and what are not enabled. So the format for this is deb, because they're all deb files. This is an apt-get system. Deb is the name of the packages. So deb, and then the location for the repository, the distribution that the repository is for, and then a list of the repositories represented at that URL. So here we have enabled the main and the restricted. So restricted is enabled by default. Okay? So we have main and restricted enabled. Here's that source, that deb source that I talked about. And the same thing, we have main and restricted. Remember, this is two separate things. One is the precompiled binaries. One is the source code that you can download and compile on your own. And then down here we have, so deb and the URL that it's located at, precise updates. Okay, so these are updates for which repositories? For the main and the restricted repositories. Same as up here, but these are for updates for the precise thing. This is the original, and these are updates. And then you're going to see a pattern here. Let's scroll down a little more. Next, we're going to go into the universe and universe updates. You'll notice here the software from this repository is entirely unsupported. Remember we said universe was not supported? This is just community supported. Okay? And so we have the deb, these are the binaries, the precise 12.04 is precise pangolin, so precise, and then the universe is enabled by default. Here's the source code for that. And then the updates, precise updates for the universe and for the universe. So we have universe and universe updates, and the source for all of those are enabled. The next stanza down here is the multiverse, which is also enabled. So multiverse is enabled along with the updates for multiverse. We'll scroll down a little bit more. And here we have, and this actually gives us a little bit of information. Software from this repository has not been tested as extensively as the main release, but it includes newer versions of some of the applications that might be useful. And what specifically are we talking about? Backports. Remember I talked about backports? This is if the existing applications have newer useful features in a newer version. They will sometimes backport from, like, let's say 12.10, they'll backport it to precise pangolin of 12.04, and it'll be in this repository. And this one is enabled by default along with its source, and it covers backports in the main, the restricted, universe, and multiverse repositories. So does that make sense? We kind of just tack on all the ones on the end from this archive that we're going to get, the backports for all of those different repos. And then security, which is kind of tied into updates, but we have security updates for main and restricted, for universe, and for multiverse. So all of them are represented in this stanza. Again, security updates are just more, I don't want to say mandatory, but security updates are more important to have installed quickly. So it's not just going to be up. I'm going to scroll up a little bit. It's not just like the updates. The security repos are when there's been a security problem and they had to fix a security related problem. So that's why these are very important. Never want to comment these. All right. And then the two that are commented by default are the partner repository. And this is like Adobe's Flash Player. That's one of the main things that's in here. So we probably don't actually want to uncomment that in our server. And then the extras repository, which is kind of new and not used all that much. It's not part of Ubuntu, but is offered by third-party developers who want to ship their latest software. So remember I said that if applications are not in the current distro, but they're in newer ones, and they want to ship their latest software to even older versions of, older versions like Precise Pangolin 1204, they can put it in the extras repository. There's not much in the extras repository. This is, like I said, kind of a new concept. So that's all of the things here. You'll notice it's not even referenced in here, the proposed repository. That's only if you're a developer or only on the cutting edge and you want to be testing software. You would have to actually manually add that repo yourself. But this is by default what is installed. Remember, we just installed this server, and this is the default settings in the sources.list. Again, a lot of text to look at, but hopefully that makes sense. These sections I'll go one more time. It starts with deb or deb source, whether it's a deb file or the source code in a deb file, the location that the repository lives, what distribution it's for, Precise, this is a security update, or Precise backports, or just Precise, the original software that came, by default in the repository, and then which repositories this URL is hosting, so the main and restricted. So it's in 4 sections. The last section can be a list like this. You just keep tacking on all the ones that happen to exist there. That's what it looks like by default. So let me go correct our slide a little bit, and then we'll move on to maybe creating our own mirror, because that's really cool. Okay, looks like I wasn't too far off. Most of these, so yes, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, they're all turned on by default. Also, backports is on by default, which I did not know, but now we've learned together. And then these two, the partner and the extras repositories, these are disabled by default, and the proposed repository wasn't even mentioned in the default sources.list file. You have to add that yourself. So that's a self-add sort of thing. And then I just wrote up here really quickly that there's also a CD-ROM repository that you noticed was commented on the top of our file. This is for computers without network access. So you can install software packages and dependencies as long as they're on the original installation CD-ROM. All right, so I hope that makes sense. That's how the repositories work. It's kind of confusing. Once they're set up, actually, you probably won't even have to touch them, because by default, pretty much everything you need is going to be enabled, and you probably don't want the partner repository installed on your server anyway. That includes things like Adobe products, which are generally more useful on the desktop. And backports, if it's a server, you probably don't necessarily want backports. You may, so this is turned on anyway by default. All right, so let's talk about once it's installed, which it's already done for us, and you understand all the different repositories, what are some of the things you want to install right away? So your server is out of the box, whether you've chosen roles to install during the installation or you've used like an easy install that just installed the bare bones. There's a couple programs, well there's actually quite a few as I started listing them, programs that I recommend you put on there, or at least check out to see if it's something that makes sense for your situation. The first thing I always do is I install Vim or VIM. Now every time you see me use an editor on the command line, I'm using VI, or I type VI and it actually starts VIM or Vim. This stands for VI modified. And basically this adds nice colors and allows you to use your arrow keys and stuff like that. VI is a kind of a complex editor, but it's on just about every Unix or Linux system you'll ever connect to. So it's good to know how to use VI, even though you don't necessarily have to administer an Ubuntu server. I think by default, Ubuntu expects you to use the program called Nano. And it's a lot easier to use. You may want to try that. You may prefer Nano over VI. But if you use VI, I recommend installing Vim because it makes VI a lot nicer. All right. OpenSSH server, I mentioned that during the installation process that's something you want. This allows you to get into your server. This is, SSH is a command that you use to connect to a server. This is the daemon that's going to be listening for that connection and allowing you to connect and it'll allow you to do so many things. Connecting,
get it to the terminal, piping traffic. You can do all sorts of tricks with OpenSSH. So installing this on a server is almost vital. Another thing that you may or may not know about, it's a program called Screen. Screen is just a really cool thing that you can put something in the background. I will demonstrate this very, very quickly. Here we are back at the server. Basically, I just logged in. Here, I'll show you. So we're disconnected. We're going to log into the server, SSH in. I'm going to type screen, and it's going to say, hey, you've entered screen. Press space or enter or return to end. So here we are. Now I'm in a screen session. Now what does that mean? Well, if I ping my local host address, it should just ping forever, right? Now, what if I want to do something else while I'm pinging that? Well, with screen, you can't watch me do this, but Control A and then press D, it will disconnect or detach my screen session. Okay, now I can even exit. I can log out, I can drive home, I can log back into my server, and if I want to see that ping that's going on, I type screen -DR for disconnect in case it's connected somewhere else, and reconnect, connect to my local screen. So I just remember Screen Doctor. DR for doctor. That's just my little mnemonic to help remember. So screen-DR, hit enter, and here my ping has been going on that whole time in the background. It's just a way you can do things in the background and disconnect. Remember, Control A, D, and you can do some more things like have multiple screen sessions, but that's the gist. That's what it's for, so you can have something running in the background even if you're not logged into the system. Okay, back to our list. So that's Screen, really, really awesome. That's for backgrounding stuff. Postfix. I recommend installing Postfix because what Postfix does is allows for email notifications. My handwriting is getting bad there, okay? Notifications, so this means if a server process or a daemon starts to fail or something, it will email you notifications at your regular email address, not just local to the server, but you can set it up so that it'll email it to the greater internet. And that's what you want to do. You want to make sure that you get notifications from your server when things go wrong. All right, this isn't necessarily as important, but mail utils, I add this so that I can do command line mail things, right? Let's say I want to mail something in a script or in a cron job. I want part of the output to be mailed. Well, with mail utils, there's a simple program called mail. And it allows you to mail things, email things directly from the command line. So I like mail utils. Sysstat, now this is starting to talk about troubleshooting. I know it's bad to assume things are going to go wrong, right? But it's nice to have tools to troubleshoot things. Sysstat and IOStat is actually a part of Sysstat. This doesn't go here. So Sysstat includes IOStat, just to see how much disk I/O is going on. That is to go along with tools like TOP so that you can help troubleshoot system load and things like that. And what I meant here is I/O, let me change my marker color, IOTOP, not IOStat. And this is like TOP for I/O, for input, output. So IOTOP is a great program, goes along with IOStat, input, output, stat, and that's for troubleshooting. All right, so these are just my quick suggestions for things that you install on every server. They're tools that I like. I use a lot. Some of them I use more than others. I use Vim on like every time I log in, and I use Screen quite often. But that's just some nice things to install that aren't necessarily installed by default that you want to have so that you can best utilize your server. Now, I think we have time to quickly talk about one thing I get asked a lot. How to set up a mirror, because people, when I say I have a local Ubuntu mirror, they say, holy cow, how did you do that? Well, it's really, really simple. So I'll get you started, and then if that's something you want to do, hey, you can go ahead. Here's a cool link, actually, on the very bottom of the slide. This will take you to the community resource for setting up different types of rsync mirrors, or different types of Ubuntu mirrors. And to note, this is capital. This R, I don't know why, but in this whole URL, this is a capital R, so that's important to note. I'll just talk briefly about the advantages and disadvantages of each of the methods. There's other methods as well, but these are the most commonly used methods to create a mirror, and I'll show you on my system the mirror that I've set up. I know we're running out of time, but it's kind of cool. I mean, mirrors are just cool to have. So, DebMirror. Now, DebMirror is fairly simple, and it's designed to do just that. It mirrors Debian apt repositories. The thing that's really critical about this, and I do use this, It allows you to download things over HTTP, and this comes in really important with the partner repository. Because the partner repository, at least unless it's very recently changed, you cannot do the partner repository over rsync. So DebMirror will retrieve the files over HTTP, allowing you to mirror it. All right, I think they don't necessarily want you to mirror this because it's third-party products, but sometimes you're in a situation where you need to have a local mirror of the partner repository. Okay, apt-mirror, this works. A lot of people use apt-mirror, and it does the same sort of thing. It mirrors apt repositories. It works, but it's fairly complex to set up. You know, I went to set this up, and it's fairly complex. It doesn't offer a ton more features or anything than DebMirror. But it's an option. A lot of people use apt-mirror. And then lastly, this is what I use mainly for. I use this for everything except the partner repository. Is just plain old rsync. It's simple, it's easy to script, it's easy to schedule in a cron job. Basically, rsync it syncs your local files with a remote repository. So remote sync, it syncs the remote repository with your computer. And it's easy to script. It's very simple. I love rsync. I love rsync for everything. I do my server backups with rsync. I water the dog with rsync. I feed the cat with rsync. Two of those are lies, but I do love rsync a lot. I use it for a whole bunch of stuff. This is the URL that you want to go to. This whole thing, you can pause it and type that in. It will take you to a huge page with multiple instructions on how to do an rsync mirror of your Ubuntu server. It also talks about DebMirror, which is really cool, like I said, because it will use HTTP or FTP instead of just rsync. But this will take you through. It even has sample scripts that you can put in your cron job. We're not going to go through the entire script, but just know it's really simple to keep things up to date. All right, and then we do have to change. Well, once it's set up, we need to change our clients to point to our mirror instead of the other mirror. That makes sense, right? And then lastly, if you want to become an official Ubuntu mirror, make sure you have lots and lots of bandwidth, and you can do that as well. So let's go and look and see what my personal mirror looks like so you can see what it's going to look like when you're all done. Okay, so I've logged into my local server. This is my personal server in my office here at home. So you'll see I'm logged in as root, and the reason I did that is I wanted to show you how I have the cron job set up. But first, let's go to var www mirror. This is where I keep my mirror. We can keep it anywhere you want, but this is where I keep mine. And you'll see that I have several things. I have a CentOS mirror that I've set up, which is outside of the scope of this Nugget series, but nonetheless I've set that up as well. And then I have, basically, this is the main mirror. This is the Ubuntu mirror. This is what it looks like inside. Oh, it looks like it's actually updating right now. How cool is that? And this has all of those different repositories, Multiverse, Universe, everything is located inside this Ubuntu folder. Now, I personally also mirror the partner repository using DebMirror. So that's something that I do. If we look in there, inside the partner repository, it looks similar to this, right? And that's, that sort of a thing. It looks similar to the Ubuntu one, but this is specifically the partner repository. And then the other thing that I do that I haven't mentioned yet is releases. I mirror the Ubuntu releases. And that just means all of the ISO images for the various versions of Ubuntu that are available. I haven't updated this for Xubuntu. That's something I actually want to do as well, is get the Xubuntu releases. But these are Ubuntu releases. And now I'll show you my cron job that actually does this, okay? Because here I have several different mirrors in my mirror directory, and it was really easy to keep updated because I just have it do it automatically. And let me explain these. I'm going to stretch this out a little bit. Okay, so these are the times. If you're not familiar with cron, these are the minute and the hour of every day that these happen. So at 2150, I do an rsync of the releases. So these are all the releases, all the ISO files, and I have it do a mirror of those into my var mirror releases folder. And then at 2:13 in the morning, I do the full Ubuntu mirror sync. Okay, and this is a script that is downloadable from that URL I gave you on the community website. And this just does rsync mirror of the entire repo. And then at 1:04 a.m., I do the partner sync repository. I sync the partner repository using debmirror. This is just a little script that I've done that allows for that. Again, that script is on that link that I gave you as well. And then at 5:05 in the morning, I actually rsync the CentOS repository. Again, that's not the operating system we're working on with this Nugget series, but hey, I'm a nerd, and now you know that I also have a CentOS mirror as well. So the timing here, all I did is staggered these a bit. If I was really intelligent, I probably could have made it so that the firing one off, like I could have put a script that once this completed, the next one started and the next one started. In fact, that's kind of a good idea. Maybe I'll do that. But for right now, I staggered the start times so that they start at different times and they're not all running trying to use the same bandwidth. Okay, that's how I have my mirror set up. It's really not that difficult. If you read that link I gave you on the Ubuntu website, you'll be able to do it without any problem. Which brings us back to our original slide, the initial setup considerations. Now we're going to learn a lot more about Ubuntu. If you're worried that, Sean, this is now the fifth nugget in the series and we're just still talking about installation, don't worry, we're going to be talking about a lot more as we go. But if we don't have a good basis without a good foundation, it's all going to be even more confusing later on. So I hope that this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.